Welcome to First Impressions. Today I'm talking with James, the CRO of Optable, and we're going to talk about the Optable data collaboration platform. James, can you talk to us about the company and then give us a demo?
Yeah, sure, Rob. Thanks very much. Yeah, there's really three kind of key things that I want to cover today, and really three really important things that I want the viewers to leave with. So I'd love for everyone to just, we'll level set and kind of understand, like, what is a data clean room? What is the definition of it? And especially, what does that look like from a publisher or media owner perspective? There's a lot of things that Optable has built that are hooks that have been designed specifically for digital publishers. So I want to talk a little bit about that and a lot about that through the publisher perspective. And then I want you to just kind of understand, like, who Optable is, what we do, why we're different from our competitors, and why our solution is we think the right one for the real-time media use cases. So just to talk about the history of the company a little bit, the founders, Optable is headquartered in Montreal. I live in London in the UK, but I'm actually speaking to you today from a hotel room in Toronto. So we're moving time zones. But the founders of Optable had actually founded and built a DSP and ad serving platform in Montreal. They founded AdGear in 2010. In 2016, AdGear was acquired by Samsung and really became the backbone for Samsung ads. So they had scaled up AdGear. AdGear, when they got acquired, probably had about 40, maybe 50 people. They scaled that up to over 250 engineers and really built the entire Samsung ads platform and the platform that Samsung built their massive advertising business on. All that was built in Montreal by the same team that founded Optable. And then so they left in 2020, launched Optable, and started to come to market around August of 2021 with the first clients, who were some publishers in Canada. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So Optable offers a data collaboration platform which allows clients to create safe, secure, and purpose-limited data clean rooms. Now, I use the term purpose-limited intentionally because if you think about data clean rooms, there's a bunch of things that really become important. And one of them is protecting the privacy and the sovereignty of the user data that's inherent in the platform. So I use the term purpose limited intentionally because if you think about first-party data from a consent point of view, users may have consented for analysis, or they may have consented for activation or targeting. And so you need to make sure that when you open up a clean room and you invite your partners in to match with you, that clean room is only limited to the purposes for which the users have consented. So it's a really, really important consideration. So a couple of key things that make us different from our competitors. So we're very focused on frictionless collaboration and interoperability. Only one side of the match needs to be a customer of Optable. That's very, very different from other clean room platforms. We're built for real-time activation, and so it's another key differentiator. I'm going to get into that in the demo, but we actually integrate with publisher websites, and we can take data in real time, and we can push data out in real time. So there's a lot of things that we've built and that we've architected where we've taken sort of, privacy-enhancing technologies and a lot of the similar cryptographic techniques that other clean rooms are using, but we've really built real-time programmatic workflows around those in a way that we think is pretty unique and differentiated. And so let's take a level set for just a second before we get into the demo. And I want to just talk about what a clean room is, right? Because I think that there's a lot of misinformation in the market. There's a lot of traditional marketing analytics companies who said, hey, we've been doing data clean rooms for like 20 years. And while that's true, what they've really been doing is created this kind of safe space, this third-party database, let's say, that their customers don't have access to, and then they still physically merge the data in order to measure the overlap of two data sets. So you might have a marketing analytics company that takes a data set from an advertiser and a retailer, and they'll physically merge those two data sets in order to give the advertiser, let's say, information on who purchased their products at the retailer website. So that's great. It can really accomplish the outcome, but it's not safe, it's not purpose limited, and it's not secure, and there's a whole bunch of risk of data leakage. So the world is really changing. And so what you're seeing now with, I'll call them the new generation of data clean rooms, is using very advanced cryptography and privacy enhancing technologies to ensure that you can take two data sets, you can measure and match the overlap between them without the underlying data ever being physically merged and without the underlying data ever becoming unencrypted. And so there's a really, really key difference there. And that's our definition of a clean room, right? Where we're using private information exchange protocols to ensure that data remains private on both sides of that match. I'm going to get into a little bit more in the demo.
James, I have one thing on, one comment, maybe you can react to this, is I think that factor of that purpose limited data clean room, that phrase purpose limited, is something that you bring up to your counsel, right? To your privacy team or whatever, to make sure they understand that this is going to be something that's going to pass the rigor of any kind of analysis in terms of, did you get the proper consent and did you treat that information correctly? I think that's going to be one of the main questions anyone should be asking or diving into when they start to analyze these things.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And we're actually working with a number of the consent management platforms to ensure that the consent status of the user data that's in our platform remains consistent, right? So if a user goes to a consent management platform and consents for analytics, that means you can open an analysis clean room and use that user's data. But if that user withdraws that consent, then we need to know about that in real time so that we can then remove that user and suppress that user from the clean rooms. So there's 5 key components, I think, in the way that we think about data clean rooms, and it's connectivity, identity resolution, audiences, the collaboration bits, and then activation and measurement. Now, I'm not going to have time today to get into all of these. So what I'm going to focus on is the importance of kind of a first-party identity graph being the core data model of any data clean room. And this is really important for publishers because publishers have first-party identity data that often comes from disparate and multiple sources. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. And then I'm going to talk about collaboration and open collaboration and why that's so important in interoperability. Really want to get into activation because there's some things that we do on the activation side that enable activation on the sell side in a way that preserves the integrity of the clean room. So in other words, you can activate audiences and target them with advertising directly out of the clean room without having to push that audience into the open bid stream or without having to connect it to a third-party ID. And I think that's a really, really important differentiator. Okay, great. So I am going to fire up the demo. Here we go. All right, well, what you're looking at here, Rob, is what we call a data collaboration node or a DCN. So each DCN is completely physically decentralized from all other DCNs. Now, why is that important? Well, for some of the reasons I spoke about earlier, if you're, if you have 2 Optable customers that want to do a match of their data, that data is never physically merged, right? It always stays inherently separate in the DCN. You can also think of it from a European perspective. If you are a publisher in Europe and you want to make sure that the data in your DCN never gets transferred over to the United States. You don't want to get into the sort of, whole rigmarole of like European US data transfers. We all know what a nightmare that can be. So when you have an Optable DCN that's hosted on a European data center, the data in that DCN effectively never has to be moved or never has to call back to the United States. So it's a really, really important consideration when you're thinking about data clean rooms. So the core model of our system is really a first-party identity graph, and I kind of talked a little bit about that. In this particular example, there are 6 million user profiles or clusters made up of 4.1 million emails. We've got Google advertising IDs, Apple IDs, phone numbers, IPs, a number of first-party identifiers. Now, you can also choose to hang traits off of these identifiers. Now, we don't bring any data to the table, so these traits are not our data. This is only the data of our clients. We make sure that that trait data is only limited to the purposes of the clean room. And so we're not a DMP. We don't have all of the trait information. You're only going to put specific traits into the system. So consent would be a good example of a trait that you might want to have in our system. Okay, great. So how do you get data into the platform? And this is where it becomes interesting for publishers. So, you can set up API sources and you can push in sources from a CDP or DMP. You can upload files if you have, let's say email addresses matched to phone numbers and that sort of thing, and you want to just upload those through a file. But what you can also do that's very unique is use our SDKs, which really are just wrappers for our APIs, to send data in real time. So you can imagine that a user arrives at a publisher website, they log in using an email address. You can then send that email address along with any first-party data, first-party cookies or internal CRM IDs, CDP IDs, that sort of thing. And that all becomes part and parcel to your identity graph. And so really what we offer before you even start opening clean rooms is a way to create a single system of truth for your first-party identity graph. Now, if you're already doing that in your DMP or your CDP, that's fine. You can just, select an API source and push the data in that way. But for a lot of publishers who, may have a CDP, they may have a DMP, and they may have a data warehouse, we do offer them an opportunity to kind of connect all of those things and all of the identity data in those systems. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, I am. There was one note that that you made earlier about interoperability, right? And I think, my thought as you're talking about those partnerships and trying to get that data back and forth, there's going to need some kind of standards around that. Can you elaborate the importance of that and kind of driving that forward?
Yeah, we've been big proponents of that. You can see if you go to our website, you'll see there's links to a lot of blog posts and a lot of media that we've done. We've initiated data clean room interoperability standards at the IAB Tech Lab, and we've been heavily engaged with a number of partners and competitors around data clean room interoperability. The reality is the entire world is not going to coalesce around a single data clean room infrastructure, right? And if you look at a lot of the big sort of cloud-based data warehouse companies like Snowflake, Oracle's doing this as well, even Amazon, they all have data clean room functionality that's effectively sitting right on top of the data warehouse. So if you're a publisher and let's say you're using Snowflake and you want to work with an advertiser, let's say that's not using Snowflake, well, how do you collaborate? How do you then start to bring those two data sets together? So we've really focused on those problems and really solved for a lot of them. So I'm going to get into that now as I talk about partnerships. So as I mentioned earlier, we really focus on open interoperability and open collaboration between partners. Only one side of the match needs to be a customer of Optable. So if you're a publisher, you're using Optable, you've set up your identity graph, you've set up all of the data integrations necessary. Okay, now you're ready to invite some partners in to collaborate. So you have a couple of different options. We offer an open source utility. So your partner can just use our open source utility to encrypt their data at source, regardless of what system it sits in. And they can execute what is called a multi-party computational protocol with your data set in order to measure the overlap. I know it's a big word, huh? So that's one option. But we've also started to engage in interoperability discussions, for example, with companies like Snowflake, where you would be able to invite a brand that's using Snowflake, come in and collaborate with your first-party data set without that brand's data ever leaving Snowflake. We're having similar conversations with some of the other big cloud providers, and that's a really, really important differentiator. And it really maximizes the collaboration opportunities we think that publishers will have. Of course, if you are,
it feels like, James, I was going to say, like, that's some of the things that you've lined up to me, I think have addressed some of the concerns I think publishers have about like investing in this technology, right? Because you're kind of like, well, aren't the agencies or aren't the brands going to be the ones that kind of define the terms, leaving publishers in a position to have to sit there and try to chase, again, taking their data, moving it to some other system, making sure your privacy and legal are all good with that,
Yeah.
And of course, trusting those partners and so forth. This feels like I get to sit there and, again, like the phrasing you had of like my own identity graph, right? Suddenly I
Yes, right.
feel like there's a part of that isn't what I'm doing with my DMP, but it's sitting there creating this, again, this ability to connect and then also activate, which I know you're kind of getting to, but please
Yeah.
continue. Just interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you nailed it, right? So a publisher can use Optable, and because we're so focused on open collaboration, their advertisers can theoretically be using other clean room systems and they can still allow them to collaborate. Because what I hear from a lot of publishers is they say, like, what am I going to have like 3 or 4 different clean rooms and just be ready for whichever one the advertiser might want to bring to the table? Well, the reality is there's probably better ways to think about it. And there are ways to think about having a single system that can be interoperable with other clean room systems. It's all early days in the ecosystem, but that's definitely the approach that we're taking. So yeah, let's talk about activation, because I know that we're really close to the end on time, and I really think this is important. So effectively, what you do when you're a publisher, you invite in an advertiser, you execute a match, let's say using a match protocol like a multi-party computation protocol. Now you have a matched audience. All right, so you understand what is the overlap between the publisher's audience and the advertiser's audience. In this case, you can see this report. You can see which IDs are matched. In this case, it's email and phone number. We allow our users to schedule the matches to run, as I mentioned about programmatic and real-time use cases. We don't think that sort of a one-off binary match is necessarily the right way to go. And then you end up with a matched audience, and there's a few things you can do with that audience. So you can look at the versions, how often is the match running and when was the last match attempt. You can compute insights on the match. And so this is where I was getting to earlier with why you'd want to put some traits in the system. So you can see for that matched audience, like, what are some of the traits that you have on that matched audience? What can a publisher tell their advertiser about that audience that the advertiser did not know before? That's what gets, kind of to the heart of it. But where it's really interesting is you can activate that audience without ever having to push it out of the clean room. So you can effectively send us a first-party cookie. Remember, I talked about the entire identity graph, including all of the non-matchable first-party identifiers like cookies. You can send us a first-party cookie, and we'll push a key value directly back into Google Ad Manager or into Prebid or into a number of the other ad delivery systems that publishers are relying on. So the promise to the advertiser can literally be, I can invite you into my clean room. If you're on Snowflake, Mr. Advertiser, your data never has to leave Snowflake, but I can still activate a campaign on my website targeting your first-party data. So it's a pretty powerful value proposition in an age of cookieless, privacy-centric targeting.
Very interesting, right? And again, like that way, again, you've created this kind of gate so that it is just you targeting your audience on your site, obviously informed through this, but done in a way that protects the privacy of that user, and at the same time allows you to. I mean, again, I think that this is the place that this whole area is going to get pushed into is activation, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's great to do analysis. And that will again, hopefully as we work all of this out, you start to see the transaction working off analysis, but at some point someone's going to say, I really want to reach my audience. How do I do that? Especially as signals get weaker. One question for you off this, because it's a very top topic for publishers, is seller-defined audiences.
Yeah.
And that's an area that a lot of people, as we wait to see if the buy side's going to buy into it. People are starting to kind of rally around that concept on the publisher side. Is it kind of a way forward? How does that play with Optable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've been big proponents of seller-defined audiences right from the beginning. And so in this same sort of activation mechanism that you see here, again, the transaction mechanism is user arrives at the publisher website, send us a first-party cookie. We return the key values representing the audiences that user is a part of. Those key values can go into Google Ad Manager, into Prebid, a few different options, or they can go into other ad servers as well, of course. So in that same way, we can also just return the nodes, the seller-defined audience nodes that that user is a part of within that SDA taxonomy that's on the publisher site. So it's pretty powerful. So we can support for sure, you know, the IAB standard taxonomy right out of the box. If the publisher has a custom audience taxonomy, we can support that. And then where it gets really interesting is that if you have a brand that can work with a publisher or a group of publishers to develop custom nodes in that taxonomy just for that brand's first party audience, we can activate it that way as well. So it's privacy preserving, and it does not require the data to necessarily be put into the open bid stream. Now, if you want to, you know, take that audience and activate it by pushing IDs into Trade Desk or into DV360, you can absolutely do that. We support that. You can export those IDs to a destination. But what we offer from a sell side activation point of view is very unique and very different. And I think for certain use cases where people, advertisers or publishers, do not want to push their data into the open bid stream, we think it offers a really interesting activation opportunity.
James, I think you clearly outlined what your company does, differentiators, some ideas for publishers as they think about this particular space. It is a top topic in our community, and certainly going to be something we continue to you know, evolve and discuss as things, you know, come together. Any last comments or thoughts? And the other thing I'll throw out to you is what's the call to action if someone's interested in learning more? What do they do?
Yeah, just reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn, or go to our website, optable.co, and, you know, just fill in our request form. We'd love to get back to you with more information. We've got some publisher case studies that we can share from, you know, we get a lot of traction in Canada, which is our home market. And so we'd love to just be talking to more publishers about, you know, what's their vision around clean rooms? How do they see it impacting their first party data strategy? And would just love to engage in that conversation. So yeah, the call to action is just reach out and let's have a chat.
Great. James, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Robert. Really, really appreciate it.